right, I gotta be honest with you, I'm actually pretty legitimately excited about this video. The last several months of my Spotlight Cache videos have been like me kind of sad because there's been nothing but garbage in them for months. I mean, basically since December, maybe even further, it's been just garbage, absolute garbage. To the point where like there's some cards that you're interested in getting, and then the Spotlight Caches are filled with landmines like Phoenix Force, Nimrod, cards that are dropping in series and stuff. Like it's just, there's been very minimal value for someone who wants to roll Spotlight Caches. Even some of the variants, I mean, even though it's subjective, of course, have been a little sus. And so like, coming into this particular video, I'm legitimately excited. Not only do I think there's a lot of very interesting cards available to us in March, but I think that April looks really cool too. And of course, this is data mined content. I mean, this month we did get the trailer for, but things can still change. The April content is data mined, so they are very subject to change. But overall, I'm actually excited. There are several absolute banger weeks this month and next. And so we're going to be talking about all the different caches that are going to be available. Just a quick note about star ratings. What I basically do is if I get an idea of like, okay, are the cards meta relevant? Are they worth having in your collection? Do they have a wide breadth of decks they're playing in? Or if they're niche, are they very, very important to those archetypes? If it's a Series 4, I take a star off because it's just worth less compared to a Series 5 card for your hard-earned Spotlight keys. Then obviously I evaluate the new card and how good it might be. It's also worth knowing that things change. The meta shifts constantly, so you want to kind of bear that in mind, that over the weeks as we approach the cards and their releases, things shift. There's OTAs, the meta shifts, new decks are figured out, and so that can have an impact on whether or not these caches are particularly worth it. So, you know, frequently check back. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. Why not? Look at that, boom, snuck it right in there like a pro YouTuber. What I will say, though, is I also think that it's very valuable that you check out some other perspectives. I'm just one man with one man's opinion. Talk in the comments, you know, discuss on Reddit, on Discord, check out some other creator videos. When it comes to your valuable resources, I really do think there's a lot of value in getting a wide breadth of opinions because your resources are too valuable to just, you know, listen to one dude just popping off on the internet, you know what I mean? So I really do recommend that, you know, watch the whole video, of course, but do check out some other opinions as well because it's just too damn expensive to play Marvel Snap, right? So I do think that there's a lot of value in getting a wide range of opinions. With that being said, let's get started with March 4th to 11th. Now this is Eson, Beta Ray Bill, and Wiccan. What's interesting about this is that Eson is a shell of its former self, but it looks like it got buffed, right? Because it was originally a card that was insane. I don't even want to talk about it again because I'm just going to piss everyone off. But basically, Eson was data mined as a 6/9, which was nice, but now it's a 6/10. For after each turn, put a card from your hand that didn't start in your deck here. That's pretty cool because you can ramp him out and then he can have this effect non-stop. It's very important to note that he'll work with cards like Agamotto, the Season Pass card. He'll work with cards like Infinity Ultron. He'll work with cards like Thanos. And so there's a number of different opportunities. At first, I was almost going to lean towards a 3-star rating on him. However, I was thinking, you know what, if Agamotto is really clapping cheeks, there's a chance there's just an Eson Agamotto deck because they seem semi-synergistic. Of course, you do kind of give up a little bit of the element of control with Eson randomly pulling it from your hand. However, there could be some potential there, and so I'd be interested in seeing how that plays out. So for me, it's a 3 to 4 star rating, and it's highly dependent on whether or not Agamotto and some of the other cards like Infinity Ultron do land on their feet, but Eson, regardless, is pretty interesting. Then you have Beta Ray Bill. He's just never quite made a deck. He's a 1-star card. I do love Beta Ray Bill, but he's just not there right now. Completely meta irrelevant, so he just kind of feels like a wasted hit there. And he's been in the Spotlight Caches quite a couple times. Then you have Wiccan. This is unique. I think Wiccan is absolutely worth having in your collection. Definitely a 4-star card in my opinion. The reason why I say this is because despite the stats looking a little weak right now, there's going to be a time where Wiccan's going to become extremely valuable again. He kind of comes in and out of the meta, but when he's in there good. So Wiccan decks have been a very consistent staple in like top 10 meta decks over the last couple months. And so I would tend to think that Wiccan would be worth having in your collection, especially considering a lot of those cards that Wiccan plays with, like Quicksilver, you definitely already have, right? So I like Wiccan a lot. If you don't have Wiccan and you're interested in Eson and you don't care about Beta Ray Bill, even if you don't have Beta Ray Bill, I think this week would generally be worth rolling. If anything, for Wiccan at the very least, and Eson definitely has some potential. Moving on to March 11th to 18th. I absolutely love this week. The only thing that holds this week back is that Skaar gets dropped in series, and you also have Phastos, who is, somewhat underwhelming, but also probably better than people give it credit for. It's in a couple of decent performing decks, but I don't know, he feels like a buff candidate to me. He's like so close to being relevant. If he's a 3-4, I think he's actually probably really good. He's probably really good now. He's one of those cards that might be like, we look back at and we're like, damn, Phastos is actually probably pretty decent. But Starbrand is the star of the show this week, and I love this card. It is so good. Yes, it has a massive negative downside, but that can be mitigated with Enchantress, it can be mitigated with Zero, it can be mitigated with Sauron. The deck starts to rate itself. The question becomes is, first of all, I think Starbrand's great. I'm giving it the 4 or 5 star rating. It's a 3/10. It's now the new chunk of 3 drops. Gladiator shakes in front of Starbrand. And when you land a Gladiator play, like, it feels good. That's a lot of power. Starbrand is even more. Yes, it has this negative condition, which is extremely negative, but I do think that there are a number of ways that you can mitigate that. And Enchantress did recently get buffed, right? So it's a 4/6. Then you have the Zero, which is a 1/3. And the question then becomes is the Starbrand decks, right? So obviously Surtur got hit pretty hard. So Surtur's not really going to be, I mean, he's still going to be playable in Surtur, of course, but we're still trying to figure out how good Surtur is now. And then you have Starbrand's interactions with, of course, the Sauron, but this is kind of the first Sauron card in the longest time. Does that archetype actually stand the test of time? Like, it's going to take some testing to see if Starbrand is enough to elevate Sauron. I might think it's not. It might feel the way that Zemo did on first release. Zemo activated a new mill archetype, and it was good, but it wasn't until like you got Misery and some other pieces that it really exploded. Starbrand's going to help that archetype a lot, but I'm not sure if it takes it to that next level. So that's where my hesitation is. But I do think that's going to be definitely worth having in your collection, because there's going to come a point in time where if Zero and, well, Lizard just got buffed too, right? So Zero, Lizard, Sauron, those types of decks, right? Typhoid Mary, if that deck really starts to pop off, you're going to need Starbrand, because it's just too damn good. So much power. And with Skaar, I don't usually do this, where I have like the double like question mark, like, oh, the range of capabilities here. The reason for this is because Skaar just got buffed, nerfed as of recording. And we're seeing some experimentation with it with like Hela, but right now as of recording, we just don't have enough of a sample size to determine whether or not Skaar is going to like withstand the test of time. I suspect he's going to. He still seems like a good card, but again, I don't want to, take guesses. So I'd rather kind of give a little bit of a hey, we need to see how Skaar's nerf shapes up, right? Right now it's seeing play in Hela. It's still seeing play in some Surtur shells that they're experimenting with, but again, very early days. It is dropping to Series 4 from 5 based on the drops, so that is something worth considering as well. But overall, I think this is a very strong week. And if you thought that week was good, I think this week is incredible, especially if you don't have Cassandra Nova. Now, Cassandra Nova was given away for free as part of one of the limited time game modes. And then you have Nico. Nico is incredible, and if you don't have Nico in your collection, you have to get Nico in your collection. You got to save up and roll for Nico at the bare minimum. Let's assume you don't have Cassandra Nova, you don't have Nico, and you're interested in Firehair. This is an absolutely banger week that's worth saving your tokens for and your caches for, because all 3 of these cards I suspect, well, 2 of them I know are great. I suspect Firehair is going to be fantastic. And it's funny because at first I was like kind of ho-hum about Firehair. I saw the potential in Firehair, but then when I was watching the trailer, I was like, oh damn, that's how it works. This is going to be nuts. And yes, it's a 2-drop, and like it kind of takes a spot of like Cable in like a mill style deck. And I think that Firehair is going to be very natural in a mill Misery style deck, which is already on the cusp of being very legitimately meta relevant. It is meta relevant in terms of play, but like not necessarily in terms of like the win rate, cube rate side. But Firehair is going to be a whole new level of activation that might send it to the stars. And my concern is that like come March 18th, does Mill eat a nerf before then? Does Zemo get nerfed or something before Firehair gets into our hands, right? So that's my only concern, that like, this might age a little more difficultly if they try to target Mill in some ways, because Mill is like clogged to some degree. If Mill is too good, like you're literally not playing Marvel Snap anymore. If your hand just explodes and you don't get to do anything, or your deck just explodes, and like that sucks, right? So they're going to keep a very fine eye on it, and that's the concern. In terms of standard destroy, it does have potential as well, because you could do something like Venom cards, and then like if you Venom a Carnage and like the Wolverine happens to bounce into the Firehair location, you can then Firehair will then reproc the Carnage effect on top of the Wolverine bounce it again. So like it seems a little finicky, but potential is there. But I do think it's going to be tested in Mill 100%. With Cassandra Nova and Nico Minoru, I think they're absolutely must-haves in your collection, especially Nico. Cassandra Nova is really good because you're seeing a lot of an emergence of like Ajax and Toxic style decks, especially with Diamondback and Laofi that came out, this past little bit here. So I think that you're going to want these cards in your collection. I am particularly excited about this week, especially if you don't have any 3 of these cards. For me, it's a 5-star. Going to March 25th to April 1st, we have Khonshu. Now, I'm going to be starting with the discussion specifically about Khonshu. I'll show the Spotlight Cache after, but I needed more space to talk about all the cards here. So Khonshu is unique in the sense that essentially you're going to be getting you get the card, and every time you discard it, it actually kind of upgrades to some degree, with the exception of the last stage. So if you discard it twice, you get a final stage, and if you discard that, well, then you got a Hell at it or Ghost Rider it or something, right? But basically, when discarded, it returns in its next phase. On reveal, resurrect a card you discarded to another location with its power set to 5. Then that gets upgraded to 7, and then finally 12. So imagine using Silver Samurai, discarding something like a Iron Man, and then you pop off on the Khonshu a couple times, and then you bring back Iron Man as a 12. That's pretty insane, right? So Silver Samurai is going to feast here. I'm sure there's going to be decks that are kind of revolving around that. But overall, it seems like there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through, but the power potential is certainly there. So it seems like a high skill, high ceiling card with a very low floor, because there's a chance you don't really get it going. And I mean, at its worst, it's a 6/5 that brings back another thing with 5 power, which could be potentially interesting. If anything, it could be procking stuff again to build up swarms for bullseyes. I don't know, I gotta cook a little bit more, but I do think that Khonshu definitely has some potential. It's a very interesting design card. So for me, I'm seeing a 3 or 4 star rating for Khonshu. I do think that it has it has potential to miss too. I think it could potentially miss, but popping off on it, I think, would be extremely powerful. Talking about the Spotlight Caches as a whole, with Khonshu, you do have Scorn and Corvus Glaive, so you're very much leaning into that discard archetype, which I like when they do with the Spotlight Caches. The Scorn variant's absolutely fire as well. I think Scorn is very good. It is probably underappreciated in a lot of discard shells. It does a great job as a backup Apocalypse play in some regards. It works well, generally speaking, with the Bullseye style plays. And Corvus Glaive, despite the fact that Corvus has not been seeing as much play with the Khonshu style deck, there's a good chance that you might be seeing more Corvus, because not only is the ramp going to be useful, because you can ramp into Khonshu and then drop something with a Apocalypse or something like that, right? But because you're going to be discarding more things, and Khonshu's another card that wants to return to the hand. So you want to be using your turns as effectively as possible with Corvus Glaive, because when you Corvus, you're hoping to hit multiple things and at least Khonshu once, right? So that you can kind of get that ball rolling with it. And of course, if you Corvus, you're discarding 2 things, so naturally Khonshu's already going to have something it can bring back. Unless, of course, it's something that immediately returns to your hand, like a Scorn or an Apocalypse or a Swarm. I digress. You understand what I mean, right? So if you hit the Morbius, right? Morbius will come back with the buff power from Khonshu. So anyways, a lot of potential here. I like it. It's a good week, but I like Scorn, but Corvus maybe a little long in the tooth here, but the synergy is unmistakable. This could potentially be a pretty decent week. We're going to be going into the April. These are data mines, and it's one thing worth noting here is that data mines can change rather rapidly. The cards that are in the data mines, the statistics, the abilities, everything is open to be changed at second dinner's discretion, okay, guys? So we're kind of looking into the future here, and hopefully, we get an indication of what's worth your time. And one thing I would mention as well is if you like to support the content and you're enjoying the video, consider hitting that like button. It's absolutely free. It helps tremendously with the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate your support, guys, as we talk about Goliath, Gwenpool, and Sersi. Goliath looks like it could be absolutely cracked. Legitimately cracked. It is an ongoing that has 1 power for every other ongoing you have in play. It's a 2/1. Are you kidding me? This is fantastic, because one of the things that ongoing decks struggle with is they just need cheaper ongoings for those Spectrum pop-offs, right? It's not a 1-drop. I would have almost wanted it to be a 1-drop. It's kind of really what we want for ongoing, but still, this is an incredibly high scaling 2-drop in a deck that really just does its thing. Is it niche? Yeah, but this is going to get stuff done, man. I think it's very powerful. There's a good chance I think it releases as a 2/0. 2/1 seems like pretty strong considering what it can do. As an ongoing card, it is vulnerable to Enchantress and other stuff, right? It has some vulnerabilities, but it has the potential to put up some serious points. And so I am excited about Goliath. It seems like it could be potentially fantastic. When we talk about the other cards that are with it, I think the Gwenpool is very good. I think that it's seeing some play into a number of different decks and a number of different shells. I mostly played in Surfer, but Gwenpool's legit. It's a good card. It's not cracked. It is one of the more modest season pass cards we've received recently, but it's still relevant. It's still seeing play in the meta. And and I think that it's good. It's a good card, definitely worth having in your collection. And Sersi is kind of poo. There's moments where people like, they kind of pump Sersi up a bit. They like Sersi, and that ain't me, man. I think Sersi sucks. Like, every time I play Sersi, it just kind of disappoints me. Now, I understand, like, especially with the Annihilus buff we got, maybe you start cooking with the Annihilus and the, the Sersi Sentry stuff, taking that Void, flipping it, and that could be interesting, I suppose. But at the end of the day, like, Sersi is a bit of a wild card. That's what makes it fun. Like, it's a fun card, but is it worth having in your collection? Yes. But is it meta relevant? No, not right now, at least, but things can change. I'd be kind of surprised if Sersi all of a sudden became meta relevant, but hey, crazier things have happened in the past, as they like to say. So that's April 1st to 8th, my take on that week there. Do like it. Definitely a good week. And the next week is Kahhori, who honestly sounds fantastic as well. And Kahhori as a 4-drop has the potential to get absolutely massive, especially when you consider that you have Victoria Hand, you have some hand generative stuff, you have cards that are legit adding stuff to your hand as well, right? So it's all about generating things to your hand. And so like Gorgon might be particularly valuable this month. And so anyways, Kahhori looks legitimately fantastic. For a 4-drop that could potentially be a 3-drop hit with Zabu, it has tremendous power potential, big stats, massive stats, and relatively straightforward to hit. Again, if you have 4 cards in your hand, it's a 4/10. 4/10 is kind of the sweet gravy line. 4/12 should be a little harder to hit, but like on turn 5, you could play something like a Devil Dinosaur. Turn 6, you Coulson and Kahhori. That's big stats, right? Like, that's big stats. Devil's running up, Kahhori's popping off. That's, of course, assuming you got hit by a Zabu. Or you could do something as simple as, play Victoria Hand Kahhori or whatever, right? So there's a lot of options you can do with this type of deck, and I'm just excited for it, because I think Devil Dinosaur got a sniff at being relevant with the release of Victoria Hand and those hand gen stuff, and it just didn't pan out for it. Victoria Hand is still really good. I think it's a good card. It's probably seeing less play than it should be, but Kahhori might actually take that archetype a little bit further, because it wants that hand generation, right? It wants that big, thick hand that it can then throw down some serious power with. With regards to Hydration Robert and CUll Obsidian, both are good cards. Hydra Bob's nerf did get felt pretty significantly when it was a 1/5, was absolutely cracked. As a 1/4, it's still good. It's seeing a 49% win rate, which is a little unfortunate, a little on the lower side. CUll Obsidian getting dropped to a Series 4 with the most recent series drops. However, if you have Sam Wilson Captain America, CUll Obsidian is making a lot of those decks, and he's very effective in them. That shield means it has an automatic place to just drop every single game. It has to be where the shield is. You can move the shield if Sam Wilson's out there, but otherwise you have a guaranteed spot for CUll Obsidian at the very least. So CUll Obsidian's stocks have gone up with Sam Wilson. Sam Wilson has proven to be a legitimate card, and so overall, I think this week is pretty solid. Maybe a little soft on these cards here, despite the fact that Hydration Robert is still good. I think CUll Obsidian is still good, but they're just not great. Like, Hydra Bob was great at 1/5, and that point that came off him just made him good. As we move to April 15th to 22nd. Now, this is Infinity Ultron. You're going to be adding 2 Infinity Ultron stones to your hand. I'll be doing a complete breakdown of like Infinity Ultron with Cozy and some stuff as well, because it looks like the stones, they might be changing them quite a bit. So as it is right now, it looks like the stones do have a lot of potential to be very interesting and impactful, and there's several of them, and so as you add them to your hand, like, you can't rely on which ones you're going to get, but they do look like they have pretty impactful abilities, and so I have high hopes for Infinity Ultron. It looks like it could potentially be a very interesting card, if not a new take on the Thanos style playstyle with a 5-drop, which I think is pretty cool. And then, of course, you have Cannonball. Cannonball is one of those cards that has been, it's been run through the ringer quite a bit, right? You have Cannonball that could potentially be, one of the most broken cards in the Sanctum Showdown or whatever, right? Then you have the Cannonball of old, which was being pumping people into the Professor X and driving them nuts, and now it's like fallen off quite a bit. It was at a 5/7, now it's a 5/8. It still sees play primarily in the screen-based decks, because now you can display something, which is very helpful, but you debuff the card you displace, which allows you to kind of hopefully win the location it's rolling into. But overall, Cannonball is a good card, definitely worth having in your collection. The stats feel a little weak on it, but I bet you Cannonball will be a good addition to your collection. So for me, I think you can roll for Cannonball if you don't have it. I actually really like this variant. I think it's great. With Pixie feels a little rough right now. Series 4, very low win rate, very low popularity, but Pixie is one of those cards that, like, when a Pixie deck pops off, there's no replacement for her. However, the Pixie Mobius and Mobius decks have not been particularly popular. We have not seen one be meta relevant in some time, approximately since when Pixie came out. But overall, I do think this week has potential. I think a lot of it is being carried by Cannonball's capabilities and the potential of Infinity Ultron. And as we kind of get more of an idea of what the stones are and how they're going to function and get like... There's too many question marks around Infinity Ultron because like we're seeing a lot of changes with the effects. And so once those get a little more ironed down, we'll have a better idea of what Infinity Ultron is capable of, which I think is going to be kind of important. Going to April 22nd to 29th, we do have Strange Supreme and Speed and US Agent. Now, both Speed and US Agent, their variants that are in the Spotlight caches are not yet available according to the data mine, so that's why you see some placeholder art there. But Strange Supreme for me is probably the disappointing one. This is like the week where I'm like, yeah, I just don't see it. There's potential for Strange Supreme. Like, the effect is powerful. Give this +2 power whenever it merges. After each turn, merge one of your cards that didn't start in your deck into this. When you're looking this far out, like my first impression is like, yeah, you know what? I don't know if it's going to work as well as some of the other ones. But then again, if Infinity Ultron's cracked and Agamotto is fantastic and like those types of like decks are working, actually, I'm not even sure. I'm assuming that the card would have to be present. So with the Agamotto cards, they're going to be banished, so they won't be present. This isn't pulling from your hand, right? So actually, the Agamotto is irrelevant. It's mainly whether or not Eson pulling stuff down into like, you know what I mean? Like with the Infinity Ultron and everything else, right? Could it work with standard Thanos decks, right? There's tons of potential, right? Definitely tons of potential here. So Strange Supreme, I'm a little cautiously optimistic on. Maybe I should have just given it 3 stars. I said 2 to 3. I'm kind of more on the 3 side. I just want to see how everything else plays out before it, if that makes sense, right? With Speed is probably one of the best cards that no one plays. Like, honestly, the least exciting card in Marvel Snap, but statistically, just so good. Like, it's a legit card. I should have given it 3 stars, but it's not played in many decks at all. Like, people just don't play the card. Whereas US Agent, which I actually think is probably not as good as Speed, but is better than Speed because it sees play in some legitimate archetypes that are actually really meta relevant right now. So ironically, as an individual card in a vacuum, I think Speed's better, but US Agent is in better decks right now, seeing more play, and so I think that US Agent's worth adding to your collection, despite the fact that it got nerfed from its -4 kind of debuff, right, which is absolutely insane. So anyway, with this week here, 2 stars, but again, Strange Supreme is a huge question mark depending on how some of these interactions with this hand gen is going to work out, because it does have potential to be pretty impressive from that standpoint, and of course, it's going to keep generating space for you, which is helpful as you keep playing these effects down. Then you have April 29th to May 6th. This is a bit of a stranger week. Now, I give it 2 stars, but I might want to give it like a bracket 3. I'll just leave it at 2 for now. I'll stick with my instinct. I think Hydra Stomper is going to be potentially pretty cool. It's going to be good in the decks that were like you kind of have those Scream style plays. It's an ongoing that gets +1 power for every card you've moved this game. It's a 3/1 itself. Keep in mind, like Juggernaut, you've technically moved a card, so Hydra Stomper will get +1. It's not just you moving, right? Obviously, if you Heimdall your whole board, Hydra Stomper loves it, but it's also you moving your opponent's cards, right? For everything you've moved. So Polaris should proc Hydra Stomper. The nice thing about the ongoing is that it doesn't need to be on the field of play like a collector. It can be held in hand like a Morbius and then be played down late and still get that effect, right? Hydra Stomper, I think, has a 4-star range. I think it's potentially pretty good, especially when you consider how good Scream is. So Hydra Stomper, by default, must be pretty good in that archetype, I'd imagine. Now, here's where it gets a little weaker, and this is why my rating comes down this week. Madam Web and Arana. So Madam Web, it was one of the most highly tutored cards in Snaps when it released, and then kind of fell on its face a bit, but then ultimately was pretty good. And then there was a couple decks like the Frigga Little Movers that was absolutely insane. Then you had the Bouncing Little Movers. So Madam Web has had the place where at the high end MMR brackets, she's had a high impact, especially with some of the major kind of scaling threats like Dagger and Human Torch. And Arana has been a key part of that. The only thing is if you don't move cards and you don't play move, then what the hell do you want these two for, right? So it's kind of funny because with Hydra Stomper, yes, of course, it'll work with the Madam Web, the Arana. It's synergistic from your standpoint of I played Madam Web, I played Hydra Stomper, and now I'm moving cards all over the place, and Hydra Stomper loves it. But I do see Hydra Stomper being potentially used in Scream decks, and Madam Web and Arana are not going to be in those decks either. So I do kind of have some hesitation with move, because traditionally people just don't play move. They just don't. I know you're out there, you're like, Alex, you're in the comments I'm the guy that plays move. Well, bless your heart. I do appreciate you a lot. You might be the only one watching this video that does play move. So for me, as someone who's making content for the masses, it's hard to recommend Madam Web and Arana rolling those keys, because most people just don't want to play move. It's too much of a headache, man. That's why Surtur was so popular. You just drop chunks. That's all you need to just drop chunks. You don't need to think about it. But overall, Hydra Stomper, I do see some potential with. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you had fun this month, and we'll see you next month for the Spotlight Caches in Marvel Snap.